Before I begin, I want you to know that I've got two goals today. If you consider yourself a Christian, my goal is that you would decide to stop being one. And my other goal is for people who do not consider themselves Christians to decide that you will never become one. Now here's why. As Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. "Come, follow me," Jesus said, "and I will send you out to fish for people." At once they left their nets and followed him. Now that seems like a simple story, but if we'll read between the lines a bit, we'll see this is no simple story at all. It's a profoundly important story about the difference between being a Christian and being a Christ follower. Today we are starting a 4-week series called The Lake Effect. Much of Jesus' ministry before his crucifixion and resurrection took place on the shores of Lake Gennesaret, also known as the Sea of Galilee. In this series, we're going to look at several key encounters Jesus had with his followers on or around this lake that show us what Jesus wants a relationship with him to look like. And we begin with something that gives us the clearest picture of his intentions, the calling of these first disciples. When Jesus said, "Follow me," and Peter and Andrew did, this was not likely a cold call. You know, in the past, I've always heard or read this story as if Jesus shows up out of nowhere like a door-to-door salesman and asks these guys to buy a vacuum cleaner, and they just say, "Okay, and I'll take the shop vac too." But this was no cold call. For at least some time before this, Jesus had been circulating in the same area around the Sea of Galilee where these men lived. Jesus was well known from the get-go for how he taught, all the miracles he performed, how he healed incurable diseases and cast out demons. Now think about these two brothers working together in the family fishing business, maybe taking a break for a couple of hours to go hear Jesus teach, maybe seeing him heal the sick and cast out demons. And if somebody was doing that in the town I lived in, I'd go see that just out of curiosity, wouldn't you? So when Jesus comes to them on the lakefront that morning, the men already knew who Jesus is. And now they hear him say, "Follow me." But this wasn't a call for these men to leave the fishing business to get into the religion business. This wasn't a call to change careers. It was a call to center their whole lives on following Jesus. I mean, from that moment on, these guys were Christ followers. And notice that Jesus didn't say, "Come, be Christians." I love how author Don Everts describes this call in a little book he wrote titled "Jesus with Dirty Feet." Jesus was not a Christian. He never asked anyone to become a Christian, never built a steepled building, never drew up a theological treatise, never took an offering, never wore religious garments, never incorporated for tax purposes. He simply called people to follow him. That's it. That, despite its simplicity, is it. He called people to follow him. Peter and Andrew's theology was as pure as it gets. Jesus said, "Follow me," and we did. Follow me was not a call to change the belief part of their lives and start believing certain things. Follow me was not a call to change the behavior part of their lives and start doing certain things. Follow me was a call to follow with their whole lives. And Jesus issues the same call to you and me today. Follow me. Now, that's a far different thing than what most people think of when they hear the word Christianity or Christian. Now, here are the brutal facts, and this pains me to say. I don't really like talking about this. But in a Gallup poll that spanned all of 2014, 76% of the people in our country consider themselves to be Christians. Now, if you stop and think about it, that's a lot of people. 242 million people to be exact. But are these self-identifying Christians emulating the actions and attitudes of Jesus? Are we following him? In a 2013 study, the Barna Research Group set out to answer that question. The goal of the study was to determine whether Christians have the actions and attitude of Jesus as they interact with others, or if they're more akin to the beliefs and behaviors of the Pharisees, the self-righteous sect of religious leaders described in the New Testament. Well, the findings reveal that over half of self-identified Christians in the United States are characterized by having the attitudes and actions researchers identified as Pharisaical. Man, I'm glad I'm not like those people. Wait a minute. See, on the other end of the scale, only 14% of self-identified Christians, just 1 out of every 7 Christians, seemed to represent the actions and attitudes that researchers found to be consistent with those of Jesus. And in the middle are those who have some mix of action and attitude. So it seems like that for the majority of us who call ourselves Christians, it doesn't seem to show up in our actions or even our attitudes. A person doesn't need to follow Jesus to call him or herself a Christian. Because being a Christian is often just about parts of my life. I just believe certain facts about God and Jesus and perhaps perform certain actions like pray at times and go to church somewhat often, and voila, I'm a Christian. Well, can I ask you straight up? If you consider yourself a Christian, is that what it means? To believe certain spiritual things are true and to participate in a few spiritual Christian activities? Because here's the brutal truth. The world doesn't need more Christians like that. And what I'm challenging all of us to today is this: become a Christ follower. Take a look at the card on your chair. Now, this may be the most important piece of paper you pick up for your entire life. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to give you a chance today to say yes to following Jesus. Because Jesus didn't say, hey, would you like to become a Christian? No. Jesus said, I want you to follow me. See, following is not about part of your life. It's about your whole life. And here's what saying yes to this whole life following looks like. First, it's about putting down our nets. When Jesus calls us to leave behind our nets, he is calling us to leave behind our old identity and security. And think about it. How do you think of yourself? How do you define yourself? What makes you, you? Maybe we answer that by talking about what we're good at, our successes, or what we do for a living, a career, a job, being a student, or maybe what we've got, our stuff. A house, a car, our toys. Or we might talk about it in terms of our relationships. Well, married, single, engaged. Maybe I'm a mom or I'm a dad. That's how we tend to define who we are. That's where we tend to get our sense of identity and our security. Now, don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with those things at all. I mean, there's a lot of good about those things. But for a Christ follower, those things become secondary to who we are. Anyone who thinks Jesus just went around asking people to be nicer and believe certain things, they haven't read the fine print. Jesus went around saying shocking, in-your-face words like this: if you love your father or mother more than you love me, you are not worthy of being mine. Or if you love your son or daughter more than me, you are not worthy of being mine. Wow, that's quite a statement, isn't it? I mean, understand, Jesus spoke these words in a culture where attachment to family ran deep and strong. Scholars say his call to ultimate priority above parents and children was something not even the most esteemed rabbi would demand. And this statement is an implicit declaration of his deity because only God deserves a higher place than a person's father or mother. Jesus calls people to a radical redefinition of who they are and what they will live and die for. And on several occasions, he said this: if you cling to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for me, you will find it. See, a Christian is holding on part of his life, trying to save it. But a Christ follower is trying to risk the whole thing. And when I think about risking the whole thing, I think about people like Mike and Sue Luters, who are incredibly passionate about following Jesus. And a year ago, they believed God was asking them to follow him by moving from the suburbs to the city to help further Jesus' mission at our Edgewater campus. Now, in moving, they left behind their nets, the comfort of familiarity, the home where they raised their family, their ties to the community. I'm sure that not everything has been easy, but Mike and Sue would say that it's been easier than they thought it would be. I'm guessing that even the parts of the transition that were harder were made easy knowing that they were following Jesus. See, that's what it means to follow Jesus with your whole life. So saying yes to whole life following means putting down our nets. And it also means following Jesus with our passions. I want you to think about this statement for a minute. What you care about is more important than what you believe. Now, let me explain it this way. When my son got to a certain age, somewhere in the 8 or 9 range, he would be outside with his friends, playing ball, running around, getting into moderate trouble, and he would come home, and he would stink. I mean, it was like every smell that could be gathered in his adventure glommed onto him, and when he came into the house, it was a calliope of concern for the olfactory nerve. Bad. Smelled bad. Now, I introduced my son to deodorant, to soap, not once but several times, in my effort to quell this repeat offender odor. And if you ask my son at that age, should you shower? And if you shower, should you use soap? I mean, he would say, oh, yes. And I mean, to be fair, he wasn't Pigpen. I mean, he knew what he needed to do. But let me ask you, do you think he consistently did it? No. I mean, in would come the old familiar smell, and out went my finger in the general direction of the shower. And he knew it was important. I'd say he even believed it was important. But he had to be told over and over again to do what he already believed in. But then something changed. All of a sudden, somewhere around age 13, something happened. I mean, deodorant was not only applied, but now seemingly perfumed. And was that cologne? He started leaving the house smelling like a rose, an overly manly, musky sort of rose, but a rose nonetheless. And he did it on purpose. Now, turning 13 might not change your beliefs, but somewhere around that age, what you care about certainly changes, doesn't it? He didn't just believe in it anymore. He actually started caring about it. I wonder why that is. Maybe someday he'll tell me. In fact, a mountain of research studies done on the human mind reveals that emotion plays a much bigger role in how we make decisions than information or belief. In his book, How We Decide, Jonah Lehrer makes the case that motivation is driven by feeling, not intellect. Lehrer points out, emotion and motivation share the same Latin root, movere, which means to move. The world is full of things, and it is our feelings that help us choose among them. See, what we care about, what we're passionate about, ends up driving us more than what we believe. To be a Christ follower means to care about what Jesus was passionate about. And the one thing that always got Jesus' attention and caught his eye was the needs of people. So many times in the Bible we read that Jesus is on his way to do this or go there, and then a person in need crosses his path. And what happens? Jesus saw people, and he was filled with compassion. And then he acted. He helped. He forgave. He touched. He invited. He loved. Jesus was incredibly passionate about people. Christians are defined by what they believe, but Christ followers are defined by what they care about, what they're passionate about, what Jesus is passionate about. So, being a Christ follower means putting down our nets. It means following Jesus with our passions, and it means following Jesus with our actions. See, there's a direct relationship between passion and initiative. The more passionate you are, the more proactive you will be. And to be a follower of Jesus means not only to care about what Jesus cared about, it means to go where Jesus is going. Now, Greek is the original language of the New Testament, and it has several expressions for follow me, but they all have built in the assumption of a physical following. Jesus' followers were not just hearers, they actually followed their master around. And listen, Jesus is not standing still. He's not sitting in one place like in heaven or simply residing in us. No, Jesus is living and active and always on the move, working in people's lives, changing hearts, transforming communities. And there are places he wants to take us, places where he already is and is already going himself. And following him means a change of outward direction, to go when and where he says to go. Now, Christians might define spiritual maturity by how much you know or how much spiritual information you have in your brain. But Christ followers don't focus on knowing. They focus on going. Like the first followers there by the lake, when Jesus said, "Follow me," what did they do? They went with him. They followed him where he was going. And for us, Growing as a Christ follower means shortening the amount of time between what Jesus says to do and doing it. Now, don't misunderstand me. We are very much about people being more and more into Scripture, reading the Bible, and seeking greater depths of understanding. That's a good thing. We would love it if all of us would take up the challenge of daily Bible reading to hear from God every day. But make no mistake about it, acquiring more knowledge is useless unless it helps us care about what Jesus cared about and go where he wants us to go. Because spiritual maturity isn't about what you know. It's about how quickly you're willing to go. Now give that some thought for a minute. Would you say over the past 6 months, the time it takes for you to follow what Jesus says, to go where he says go and do what he says to do is increasing or decreasing or remaining the same? See, growing as a Christ follower means having less and less time between when Jesus says move and me moving. When I think about my friend Jeff Pacina, the founder of Frontline Ministries in San Pablo City, who found Jesus as an adult in 1980 in Aurora, Illinois. 4 or 5 weeks later, he felt Jesus calling him to sell everything he had and move to the Philippines. And you know what? He did exactly that. And he's been there following Jesus ever since. Now, you might say at the time that he was a baby Christian, only 4 or 5 weeks old. But I see a very mature Christ follower. And last month, I had the privilege to see firsthand the work God had done through Jeff and his leadership over the last 35 years. And I can tell you, he dropped his nets and is passionately caring about the things that Jesus cares about, and it is making a kingdom difference. See, that's what it means to follow Jesus with your whole life. Spiritual maturity isn't about what you know. It's about how quickly you're willing to go. I want to wrap this up by having some words scroll across the screen. Some words from the book I shared from earlier, Don Everett's Jesus with Dirty Feet. These words are so inspiring and important and challenging to me, so please just let them in as you read them. Let's redefine the word Christianity to mean the never-ending adventures and journeys of the Jesus followers. Now, let me tell you what I truly believe. No, actually what I truly care about. I care about today being a day when, because of this simple story about Jesus and these first followers by a lake, we, for the first time or for the first time in a long time, hear Jesus saying, "Follow me," and we answer, "I'm in. I'm putting down my familiar nets of identity and security and self-centeredness. Lord, I'm in. I'm your follower from now on." If you need this fresh start, if you need to say yes to Jesus for the first time or say it to him again, I want to give you a chance to do that today. We gave you this card because we believe that we often need a tangible way to respond to Jesus' call to follow me. And if you're ready to say yes to Jesus, I encourage you to fill out this card as a way to declare that decision. Today can be the beginning of a whole new way of life for you and for me. Choose today to be part of the never-ending adventures and journeys of the Jesus followers. Choose today to follow Jesus.